Hey, can everybody hear me? All right. Well, hey, it's an honor to be here this morning to speak with you and to engage with some great leaders that have already spoken this morning, and I see some other great leaders in the audience. And first, I want to just give some props out to Frank and Guardian Leadership for the great program they put together today and all the things that he is doing to increase the leadership potential in public safety. Let's give Frank and Guardian Leadership a hand. You know, a few years ago, my wife and I, we went to visit my mom. And I don't know why, but every time you bring your wife to see your mom, you always come, she always wants to tell all your secrets, right? You know what I'm talking about. When you were a kid, you know, the kid next door beat Mike up and I had to go save him. He almost burnt the house down. He almost put his eye out with a BB gun, things like that. Things that you should not be telling your wife, because you want your wife to think, man, you're dashing and debonair, right? But man, that day she went to a new low. She got out the photo album, right? Let me ask you, is anybody in here very proud of your high school photos, right? Now, you know, I went to high school a lot longer back than most of you did. But, you know, there's just something about seeing you in those high school photos today. And, of course, you know, back then, you're looking at the photos, you're thinking, man, I look good. When you see them today, not so much, right? Now, if some of you still think you look good in those high school photos, you may be a little delusional. I don't know. But anyway, there's just something about years and years later seeing yourself wearing bell bottoms, straight hair, some fuzz on your top lip, stuff like that kind of says, hey, hopefully that was not me. There's been a mistake. But the point I'm trying to make is that hopefully I don't look like that and I don't dress like that anymore. And it's not because I'm ashamed. It's because I've changed. The world around me has changed. That is not the wardrobe that you wear anymore. That's not the clothes you wear anymore. And plus, you know, we get older. We get more experienced. Our priorities change. And I think that's a lesson for all of us from a leadership standpoint, is that the world is in a constant change around us. And how we led 10 years ago may not be the way to lead today. We have a different problem set that we're addressing. We have different complexities that we're addressing. We have different priorities in the workforce. I mean, when we look at the workforce alone, it's multi-generational. One size does not fit all. But as leaders, we have to embrace that change, right? We can't stop change. We have to embrace the change. Does anybody know who Tim Berners-Lee is? Tim Berners-Lee is a British scientist who in 1989, just 32 years ago, developed the World Wide Web. Now, I know what some of you are saying. That's bull. There's an ex-vice president that created the World Wide Web. I got that, but just for today, just humor me, bear with me. Let's just, for the sake of today, let's say it was Mr. Lee. Can you imagine a world without that today? Of course, this brought a lot of changes that as leaders we've had to embrace, integrate into the way that we do things. And also, we've used it as a tool, and we've also seen how it can be used to create chaos. But it's created a lot of things. Let's look at Facebook. Facebook came on the scene in 2004. And it was invented so Harvard students could connect. The second day, there was over 1,000 people that registered for Facebook back in 2004. And then when you look at Facebook today, over 30% of the world's population has a Facebook account. And when you look at social media in general and people using some sort of social media, on the average across the entire world, about 58%, and in the United States, about 82% of individuals 13 or above are using some form of social media. And as leaders, again, we've seen how it can be a tool and how it can create chaos. Think about the pandemic we just went through. The individuals that were locked in, if there had not been the World Wide Web, if there had not been Facebook, social, sit in your home and still reach out and touch family and friends to help you emotionally, to stay in contact with them. From a professional standpoint, over 18,000 law enforcement entities across the United States. And I venture to say that most of them have some type of social media presence. And the ones who don't, what are you thinking? In today's world, you got to have that. You got to have social media presence in order to recruit. You got to have social media presence as a public safety entity to disseminate information, to tell people, what you want them to do, to give them information. But also we use social media, hopefully from a public safety standpoint, to get ahead of issues. And so as leadership, we've developed and we adapt as the world around us makes us adapt. And the leaders that don't adapt and don't embrace change sometimes aren't very effective leaders. When you look at leadership in general, I bet if I ask 10 people in this room to define leadership, there'd be a variance because it's kind of like an abstract term. Everybody has a different definition of leadership. There was a guy who did research, Ross, and he looked at the definitions of leadership between 1900 and 1990. He was able to find over 200 definitions for leadership during that time period. And then when you look at the last 60 years, there's been over 65 classifications of leadership to determine dimensions of leadership. So we're constantly trying to define what leadership is, to identify what leadership is, and to capture that essence so we can replicate it and we can make good leaders. And there's many theories out there: transformational leadership, situational leadership, servant leader. But in today's world, when you're dealing with employees, one size don't fit all. Possibly one leadership style doesn't fit all. Today, leaders have to be multifunctional. They have to be a multifunctional leader because you're dealing with a employee issue at 8 o'clock. At 9:30, you're dealing with an officer-involved shooting. At 1300, you're dealing with the press. And later that day, it's council meeting or it's commissioner meeting night. You got to get prepared and you got to go to that commission meeting. You've got to compartmentalize and you've got to go up whatever you're asking the commissioners of the council for, and you've got to put that somewhere and now change into the political leader. Northouse wrote a book, and it's probably one of the most well-known books on leadership. It's written by Peter Northouse. It's called Leadership, Theory and Practice. And he gave a definition for leadership. He says it's a process where an individual can influence a group of individuals to have a like goal or to achieve a like goal. That's easier said than done. It's kind of like climbing a mountain. Macon, where I'm from, they have the Indian mounds out there, and they have the large mound back there. It's very easy for me to climb that mountain or that mound. But as the mountains get taller, it gets more complex. And as leaders are confronted with more complex issues, leadership becomes more complex. It gets harder and it gets harder. People say that we manage in times of peace and we lead in times of chaos. And I really think that's right. Think about your job on a daily basis. You're involved with stats. You're involved with making sure that the budget is where it should be. Leaders are making decisions on material things, on personnel issues. But then the chaos comes, and now you're no longer a manager, but you turn into that leader. And your subordinates and your followers expect you to stand up, and they expect you to lead because that's your job. But one thing about leadership that we've got to understand is that sometimes we think leadership involves how we interact with people. And it is, no doubt. But as leaders of organization, let's think about leadership and how it impacts the organization overall. Because that's what we're after. No organization is made up of one person or a couple of people. It's made up of a lot of people. And that leader, when you're talking about organizational leadership, that leader has to have the ability to create and sustain an organization by building people, vision, and sustainability. You got to build people, vision, and sustainability. You got to hire the right person. You got to give them the right training. You know, some people, I know when I was in the private sector last year as a chief operating officer, we wanted to create a flat organization. There's no way you can create a flat organization unless you hire the right people, unless you give them the right training. That's the only way that you're going to have the ability to give them the requisite trust to create a flat organization. And so creating a flat organization hinges on how much you trust those employees, how much you trust your subordinate leaders to do their job. And the only way to do that is also have them understand your vision and have them understand and have a shared conscience. And when I say shared conscience, where are we going? How are we going to get there? What do we stand for? What are our core values? What's the expectations of you? There's a lot of things that have to be answered, and sustainability is important too, because so many times we think about what's happening today, and we don't think about tomorrow. We think about just today. But we have to build an organization that not only can confront the issues and the problem set of today, but we've got to build an organization that can adapt to address the issues and the problem sets of tomorrow. A year down the road, 2 years down the road, 3 years down the road. Look at what's happening today in public safety. Defund the police. There are segments across the country and segments of the population that think that's the way to go. But in those communities where you have that population or segments of the population, the police leaders and public safety leaders, they still have to do their job. And we, as a profession, we have to understand the problem set that we're dealing with today, and we got to get ahead of that. We've got to stop being defensive, and we've got to be proactive. We've got to do our job, but we've got to read the tea leaves, and we've got to go out, and we've got to continue to do that engagement. We've got to continue to try to build partnerships. We've got to continue to try to build trust, and it's hard. And we're going to talk about some characteristics that a leader probably needs to have today in order to be able to do that. Now, when you look at law enforcement issues today, they are complex. And I heard a reporter a couple of days ago on one of the national news stations say, "We've never seen this in America." Really? Maybe he didn't read the same history books that I've read. When you look at the volatile nature of the 60s, man, look at the 60s, and some of you were in the 60s, like me. I'm not asking you to raise your hand. I'm just self-reporting, right? I'm just self-reporting. I have a stash of Geritol at home, so I'm good. But when you look at the 60s, what happened? Just in the 60s alone, we had an American president assassinated. Martin Luther King was assassinated. Medgar Evers. We had the president that was assassinated in 63 and 68. His brother, who was running for president, was assassinated. You don't think those are volatile times? We had the Vietnam War. We had the anti-war contingent out there. We moved into the 70s, Kent State, National Guardsmen firing on students. We had a president named Richard Nixon who resigned, Watergate. But from a community standpoint and a policing standpoint, how about the Watts riots in '65 where 34 people were killed? Over 3,000 were arrested. Then we go to '67 and we have the Detroit riots where I think 46 or so people were killed. The Newark riots in '67, 23 people killed. And then that summer of 1967, have you ever heard the phrase, from a civil rights standpoint, the long, hot summer? In 1967, look it up. In 1967, there was over 159 race riots across this country. And foundationally, one of the issues was the relationship with the police. So we have been there. Were they not there when in 1993, the same twin towers that were destroyed in 9/11 were attacked in 1993, the North Tower by Ramsey Yousef, who put explosives in the underground parking garage. They ignited. It injured 1,000 people. I think it killed 9 people. Did that reporter not read about 1995 Timothy McVeigh attacking the Murrah building? Domestic terrorism. Did that reporter not read about 1999 Columbine and how we as leaders and how we respond to active shooters, we had to look at how we used to respond and we changed to that response. So there's been a lot of stuff going on. And as far as the riots and the police and the community relations, it's a conversation that's been had, but probably one that needs to have some resolution and some conclusion to it. Even in 1968, the Kerner Commission. If you read the Kerner Commission that President Johnson basically asked to have done to look at the riots and the reason for the riots, a lot of the things that came out of the Kerner Commission we should have took to heart, because it's almost a replication of what is happening today across this country. You know, Sir Robert Peel, back in the 1800s, he came up with 9 principles. If you read those principles, 5 of those principles deal with the public, deal with the relationship with the community. Even he got it. And then when you look at some studies like the Kansas City study in 1973 that showed that just increased proactive patrol didn't impact crime that much. But then you look at Houston and you look at the Newark study that shows that foot patrols had more of an impact, and surveys with the community had an impact because the foot patrols gave the community an opportunity to meet their police force, and the surveys gave the community an opportunity to input some of their ideas, and they felt included. And of course, we talk about community partnerships. But going back to leadership, complexity versus our ability to adapt. As we look at the complex nature, and as it starts to go up, we have to have a relative line of adapting. The wider that gap, the more ineffective we are. So what does it take for a leader in today's world to have the ability to be a great leader? You can be a leader, but are you a good leader? Are you a great leader? Are you a leader just because you got promoted to sergeant? Are you a leader because you got promoted to major? Am I a leader because one time I was a chief? Titles can be given to anybody. The person makes the title. The title doesn't make the person. So the first thing I think a leader has to have in today's world is tenacity. That persistence, that determination. You got to be tenacious. You're going to get wounded. You're going to get hurt. Not everyone's going to agree with your decisions. You've got to stand up and do what you think is right, And that's not always going to be the popular thing to do. But you got to be tough enough to do it. Does anybody know who Kirk Schilling is? Man, what a great pitcher. 2004, he's pitching in the American Championship games. I think they were playing the Yankees. In the first game, he's on the mound, and he tears a tendon sheath in his ankle. And they didn't know if he was going to be able to play, but he wanted to be part of the team. He wanted to get back out there. He wanted to be part of something great. So they looked at that tendon sheath, they sewed it up, and the sixth game, after pleading and begging, they put him back in on the mound. He pitched 7 innings, gave up 1 run, but here's the thing. Maybe some of you saw that game, but the TV started to look at his ankle. He had blood seeping through his sock, the bloody sock. And you know, he fought through it. He was tenacious. He wanted to help lead this team. And if you go to the Baseball Hall of Fame today, you'll see that bloody sock. And you know what? As leaders, sometimes we got to have the bloody sock. Sometimes as leaders, we are going to be wearing that bloody sock. And then we talk about respect. Respect goes 2 ways. Respect is a 2-way street. You know, you want people to respect you. You want people to respect your rank, but you got to give respect to get respect. And I'll just stop right here and tell you that I think every public safety leader in here has the utmost respect for the men and women who come into work, put on that uniform, and go out and give selfless service to this community. They're to be commended. When you look at what's happening across the nation today, and you look at what's happening in Seattle, in Portland, in other cities, and you read the stories, there's a mass exodus. People are quitting. But you know what? Not all. Some still love their community. Some still get up, put that uniform on, and go out and feeling that they're not appreciated, but that's okay. I'm still going to serve you. You may not want me here, but that's okay. I'm still going to serve you. But I also don't want us to draw a line and say it's them against us, because it's really not. How many times each day people in uniform go into a restaurant, and when it's time to pay, someone says, "Hey, sir, ma'am, somebody's already taken care of that check." How many times has somebody walked up and said, "Thank you for your service"? That's what we've got to remember. Next thing is we've got to understand the problem set. I think leaders need to really slow down sometimes and get the facts. And the best place to get the facts is the man and woman on the ground. If we're in an airplane at 30,000 feet and we want to know what's going on the ground, we don't ask the people in the plane with us. We ask the man and woman on the ground. And try not to second guess the man and woman on the ground. You know, I worked for JIDO, the Joint IED Defeat Organization. It was an organization created to defeat the improvised explosive device that was the primary killer and maimer of our troops and our coalition partners. I went to JIDO in 2006, and by 2008, I was the director. I was running 2 of the programs there. But the first thing that we did before we started to develop any strategy on how to defeat the IED is we went over to Iraq, and we talked to the men and women on the ground. What is happening? To see firsthand. We didn't want to be that person leading from thousands of miles in the rear. We wanted to go get the ground truth. And we were very successful in doing that. Very proud that I was part of that organization. There's no telling how many lives that we saved. Also, we've got to be situational based. Give me just a few more minutes. Situational based. Every day something different is going to happen. And what you did yesterday may be foundational to how you think through your methodology, but it may be totally different than the decision you have to make today. Yesterday you were dealing with the politicians. Today you're dealing with the news, because there has been an officer-involved shooting. There's been somebody that has sent a video to the news. And so you have to take it as it comes as a leader. You know, every situation It's not, even though it sounds and it looks bad, there's always opportunity there. Look at Walt Disney. Walt Disney in 1929 created a character called Mickey Mouse. 1938, he made an animated movie called Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. He spent $1.5 million to make the movie, but it grossed $8 million in 1938. What is so amazing about that? Man, he just made a movie as Walt Disney. He did it during the Great Depression, 1929 and 1939. People said, you can't do this. Look at the economy. Walt said, hey, it'll work. You know why? People need something to smile about and to laugh at. So he took that bad situation and he turned it into something different. Leaders have the ability to impact on a daily basis. I'm going to leave you with this story. I read it some time ago. There's a 15-year-old, and he was walking into a park in a city. And the ordinance said you can't be in a park after 11 o'clock. As a police officer rode by and he saw that young man going into the park, man, he worked evening shift. I'm ready to get to the precinct, do my paperwork, get out. About a mile or so down the road, just something about the young man. They had made eye contact. He turned around, he went back. The gates to the park was locked. He got out of his car. He walked down, he found a young man in a swing. He told the young man, he said, hey, you can't be in this park. He said, why, sir? I'm not doing anything. I'm just sitting here. The officer said, hey, you just can't be in the park after 11 o'clock. But the officer could feel that something was wrong, was bothering this young man. So he said, son, what's wrong? The young man went on to tell him that his father didn't love him, that he played football that night. It was a Friday night, and his father never comes to his game. He made a great catch, and I'm looking up in the stands, and I see everybody else's father, and I don't ever see mine. So the officer talked to him and said, well, what was your father doing? Well, he's working. He's always working. The father had lost his job at a factory. He's working 2 jobs. And plus, the young man's mother had left him and his father. And so the officer looked at the young man and said, how selfish a little boy are you? And he said, what are you talking about? He said, your father's working 2 jobs to give you the life that he wants you to have. He lost his job at the factory, now he's having to work 2 jobs. You think he's sad too because your mom left? Well, yes, sir. Well, have you ever talked to him about that? No, sir. He tells him, he says, go back and you talk to your father and you tell him what you told me tonight, that it hurts you, breaks your heart not to ever see him in those stands. But I also want you to ask him how he's feeling. About 3 months later, that officer gets a call from this young man. At first, the officer does not remember who he is. And then it clicks. Oh, yeah, this is the young man I saw at the park and talked to him that night. The young man said, hey, I did what you said. I went and talked to my dad. We're doing great. But more than that, I want you to know that you saved my life, and I want you to thank you for that. He said, what do you mean I saved your life? He said, you didn't know this, but I had taken my dad's pistol, and I was going to that park because that park is where my mom and dad used to take me. And they used to push me in that swing. And some of my happiest memories are from that park. But I was going there that night to kill myself. And when I saw you pull up in that patrol car, I had the pistol in my hand. I put it in my waistband. I put the shirt down over it. You didn't pat me down. You didn't find it. But I was going to kill myself. And if I hadn't talked to you, I would have. And what I want you to think as leaders is this. Everybody in here, if I ask you how many people you've impacted in your life as a leader, somebody, most everybody, probably 100% will raise their hand and say, hey, I got an example how I've impacted someone's life. But I want you to remember this. How many people have you impacted and you don't even know you've impacted? Because what you said, what you did, how you carried yourself, how you led, I will submit to you that is many, 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 many more. As a leader, you've got something that a lot of people don't ever have, the ability to make a difference. And man, with all the great leaders I see in here, and I have relationships with some of them, I know you've already made a difference, and I know the others will make a difference. And that's what the world needs today. I really appreciate you. I'm out of time, but I really appreciate you letting me come in this morning and speak with you, and I wish you the best. And thank every one of you for your service to the community. Thank you.